Okay, welcome. We are here with, like, seriously, some of my favorite people on earth. I'm so grateful and lucky because I get to be in community with these three women very regularly and work alongside them at Radical Wellness. And they have gifting far beyond the work that they do with Radical Wellness, but it is such a gift to be able to be in that community together and share that work. And so I was really honored when all three of you agreed to do this. I don't know that maybe I gave you a choice, but I'm super, super, super stoked that you're here. And so I'd love if you just take a minute to introduce yourselves. I know we all know each other, but the world doesn't. Introduce yourselves, maybe what you do, if you're comfortable with that, and your type, wing instinct, anything you feel that is relevant to share. So don't all rush to go first.
I'll go first. Hi, I'm Katie Hayden. I am in Oklahoma. I am a therapist or counselor by trade. I'm a coach with Radical Wellness. I'm a self-preservation 3, wing 4. I have been a foster parent and am a mom and a wife and a sister and a daughter and a friend and all the things.
Thanks, Katie.
I can go next. My name's Aurora, and I am a somatic and embodiment coach. And I am really passionate about supporting people in healing and living well in their bodies, connecting to it and recognizing the incredible vessel that it is and can be. I am a relational 3, wing 4, and I am also a mom of 3 tiny people, which this season is just wild. I think that's it.
Thank you. Last but not least, Jen.
Hello, I'm Jen, Enneagram 3 with a 4 wing and a social instinct. And I'm a marriage and family therapist with Radical Wellness, relatively new to the team and loving just putting my foot back in the waters again, the professional waters. I also, like Aurora, have 3 young kids, and it's a lot. So I'm really enjoying being part of the team and helping people. My passion is really helping people move from here to there, past areas of stuckness and into freedom, however that looks for them.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jen. I'm glad you're all here, and I'm glad to have each of your unique perspectives on the type 3 while you sit as 3s and even sort of similar wings. I think you all have really nuanced journeys in the Enneagram, and so I'm excited for how you add depth for myself and anyone else in getting a better understanding of the 3, whether that's a place you center yourself or have access to it, or people in your life. You know, there are 3s in my life that I really love that I'm looking forward to gaining some depth in that as well. So I'd love if you would take a minute and share how you came to know your type and what those experiences were like. Like, Katie, I know, you know, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but like, you were kind of like iffy on the Enneagram, you know, like.
No, I was hell no.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There's no iffy about it. I was absolutely not.
Yeah. So I would love to know all of that, right? Like, because I think there are lots of people who are like, hell no, right? Or who are all hell yes. And then we kind of aren't like maybe clear about our blinding in that. So if you'll share your experiences, what typing has been like for you, you know, anything like that that feels comfortable to share, I am all in.
Katie, I have to hear about the hell no. You got to start us. You got to start us off.
That's fine. So I think as a therapist, lots of people were coming into my office, and then just from like, I again am in Oklahoma, and there's a like we're in the Bible Belt, right? So like lots of churches were doing Enneagram stuff. And what I was hearing from people was like, well, I'm a 2. And so that's just me and my 2-ness, and there's nothing you can do about it. And well, you know, he's a 7. So this is what he's always going to do, like talking about spouses or kids or whatever. And so I just really struggled with that because, I mean, what I do is support people in growth and support people in healing. And that just sounds very like I'm stuck and I'm not, for good or for bad, I'm stuck and I'm not moving. And so that was how the Enneagram was always presented to me. And so there had been several times where I was like, okay, people are really, they really like this. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to learn. And I would go in and start learning. I'd be like, oh, this just doesn't feel right. And I would step back out. There's probably, I think even after I listened to the podcast, Erin, that you and Elise did, I was like, okay, let's go. And I picked up some book and started reading it again and was like, absolutely not. And then I think also too, like, I couldn't find myself in any of that, like taking all the tests and doing all the things, like every time it came out different. And even like when it would say I was a type, that just didn't really fit well. And so, when I came to weekends and, you know, like, I think the first thing that struck me was, you know, everybody there knew their type, but everybody there had done a typing interview with you. And so they were all like, oh, what's Katie? What's Katie? What's Katie? And you were super like quiet and you wouldn't say anything. And finally you said, and this is now like, this is not a direct quote at the time. This is like what I've heard you say over the past year and a half. But it's like the iceberg, and people's behaviors are here and their motivation is here. And if you were to like type me based on things that I'd been saying or based on my behaviors, you'd be typing me from this little bitty part of the iceberg. And how the typing interview that you do is so much more in depth about the motivating factors underneath the behavior, that I was like, oh. And then to hear you talk about how to be a well-rounded person, you access all 9 types. And like your instincts is where you go most easily, where your most resources, where you're most familiar. And so that's what really got me into it, is that this isn't where I have to be stuck, and that there's growth and beauty in all 9 types, and different situations call us to lean into different parts of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Katie. And having moved through the typing process together, it was really beautiful to see how nuanced, right? Like, so maybe some of the using your voice gets labeled in like 1 or 8, right?
Yep.
Like direct clearness, and how this process can be hard, especially when you sort of bring instinct in as the self-preservation type 3, which is the counter type of 3, who doesn't sort of behaviorally in the tip of the iceberg look like any of the things that maybe the memes are all saying.
Yes.
And so we can sort of confuse behavior, the what, with the why that's like way back here. And so I just appreciated the complexity that you brought to the process for me, and owning all parts of these pieces of me. I think that's also the beautiful part about being in community with the 3 of you women who are like in your work, you know. It's like, oh, this is what all like humanity is. This is how deep we are. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that.
I think that helped too when you said you're the counter type of 3. So when you read memes about 3, that's not going to be you. I was like, oh, okay. Like, so that way, as you know, because again, it's a part of our social culture right now. And so to know that like, this can still be my type, but the way it's going to be portrayed over here isn't gonna fit well.
It's funny, I have a different history with the Enneagram, an interesting history, which is that I can say in honesty, I don't remember a time that the Enneagram was not a part of my life. Because as young as I can remember, it was very much a part of my family culture, because both my parents had discovered it when I was just a toddler, like 30 plus years ago, really. And so some of my earliest memories of the Enneagram included attending adult classes where my dad was teaching other people the Enneagram, using chalk to draw that, you know, Enneagram diagram on these old chalkboards. And I just remember it being so much a part of our family culture, but I had a sense that it was a little bit like, I didn't talk about it with my friends, you know, it was something kind of within our walls, because I was worried it would be odd or weird. But with that, my type, I don't remember ever being typed. It just sort of was like, I just was a 3. Really through, and my brother was the 9, and we all sort of knew our types, and we talked about it, and grandma's this, and I will say I have had a recent experience though of questioning that 3 label that was given to me. And my dad's a 3 too, and so it's socialized a bit in our family culture. But then having to, as an adult, even just recently, wrestle with that and own it again myself. As you mentioned, Katie, the iceberg thing, like there's the outward behaviors and then there's that motivation underneath it. And I think, anyway, I think I just questioned really the trueness of the 3, and lately have been like, yeah, that's really the motivation underneath it all. So it's been around in my life a long time, for better or worse.
I think that's amazing, Jen, because you sort of, at least in our interactions, you sort of don't have to filter through the pop culture of it, right? Like you sort of already know the depth and the intentionality behind the tool to be around growth and expansion, not necessarily like, do I fit into a meme or a box or sort of a caricature of personhood? So I think that's really amazing that you carry that in. And then the dynamic too of the sort of social instinct historically around the drive for belonging, and how we can sort of misrepresent the social instinct to two-ness.
Yeah.
And so like I'm a social 7, and when I take the online tests, I test as a 2, because it sort of messes up the difference between my security response, which is to be accepted and to belong and to please and make people happy. And the motivation of a type 7 is that I struggle to sort of stay in what's hard, right? So
and that was my questioning piece, was that wondering if I was a 2 because of the strong social instinct. And being honestly, like my role as mom to young kids, and stepping away from the professional world for a little bit, there were all of these things that behaviorally might have looked like, oh, this is a 2, and really coming back to that core, what drives me, which was undeniably the 3 drive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, so my experience with the Enneagram was very limited before I met you, Erin. I had taken a test in a MOPS group, which is Mothers of Preschoolers. So I think I had 2 little tiny people at the time, really struggling. And I had dove into yoga at that point, and I was doing a lot of yoga trainings, which was starting to expand my view of the world and of life. And yet I was coming from this background in psychology. So to me, it was very similar, behavioral psychology. So I had done a lot of like personality test stuff. And to me, it presented as another one of those. And so I filled out the form and did the thing for the MOPS, and I came up as a 1. And we were discussing this a little before we got on, and I had this like reaction to it, because I was in this season of my life where I was really expanding and figuring out the truth of who I was. And I had been told a lot in my life that I'm such a perfectionist. And I was like wanting to shed that layer of myself. And yet this yet another test, tells me I'm a perfectionist. I'm like, well, great, And so I kind of pushed it away as a whole until I met Erin. And as I listened to her talk, I was like, okay, maybe there's some more here. And then I did my interview with you, Erin, and I just felt so seen. I felt so seen. And it was such a huge experience for me, because in an hour, somebody I didn't know that well was able to really see who I was. And that was profound and healing, and so important that I sent my husband to go and do an energy typing test, which then supported our relationship in a way that continues to gift our lives together. And I'm so thankful for it. And so I now will like see memes or things, or people will talk about the Enneagram with this limited view. And I'm like, oh, but you need to know so much more, because it's so much more broad and expansive than this online test. And to really go through it with you, Erin, somebody who has such a rich knowing of it, right? It's not just the experience and the education you've had, but like, you know it, like in your knowing. And that is also a gift to, I think, the world, to watch people in their knowing, because it helps us feel into our own. And I think that's beautiful. So I think that's the end of my answer.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also think that that's why the narrative tradition, the sort of lived experience of storytelling and life, is such a profound way to teach the Enneagram, because it's a living, breathing entity. It is meant to sort of help us understand how we get to know ourselves through mind, body, and heart, right? Like through this sort of wholeness. And so I don't think that the online tests are bad, or that the playfulness of the Enneagram is wrong by any means. I just think about it like a puzzle, and every piece has a place. And so I also think that sort of these shared experiences create some depth and some richness to it. So I'm hoping that this can be another part of the puzzle piece for folks who are like, yeah, I want to sort of try on the 3. I don't know if I am or not, right? Like when I first learned the Enneagram, I swore I was a 3. I was 100% convinced I was a 3. And my Enneagram teacher, who has been working with the tool since 1970, she's a phenomenal human being. She just sort of was like, okay, she didn't put her knowing on me and say, no, you're not a 3. We were in a week-long training, and she was like, live it, experience it. And I think by like day 2 or 3, I was like, oh, I'm a 7. And she's like, welcome. Welcome to the start of your knowing, like. So I think that's what's beautiful about it, is that when I can sort of be shoulder to shoulder in this work with somebody, I get a chance to sort of try on their perspective and find the truth in that for me. So thank you each for doing that. And I do want to take a minute to sort of frame the 3, right? And because my background is in behavior as a behaviorist, I sort of go to that work, and I think there's some clarity that we can live in understanding conditions of the 3, like how it gets conditioned. And then you lay that sort of worldview, that conditioning, those patterns over top of the instinct of self-preservation, social and relational, these value systems that we learn in childhood, that you sort of hold these 2 things together, and you can sort of see how behavior becomes tweaked based on the way you orient. So of course a algorithm isn't going to get that, right? Like there's too much peopleness in that. It's too peoply. So we can sort of hold that the 3 we think of as the doer or the achiever. Sometimes it gets boiled down to like the CEO driver, and I think we miss things, right? Just like when we sort of call all ones perfectionists, we sort of miss things. That not every 3 wants to be the CEO, drive the fancy, black shiny Porsche, have the big fancy title, wear the suit, be in corporate America, right? And that's sort of how we caricaturize the 3. And instead we can sort of understand that my connection, the way that I'm loved, the way that I'm held, is outside of me. It is related to what I do, not who I am. So my output, my effort, and so that could be around getting great grades or being the top athlete. It could just be around following the rules in my household, or getting the sort of attention or respect from a parent or an authority. It doesn't have to all be tied to achievement, but 3s learn over time that the doing, the achievement, gets me that sort of recognition. And it creates this behavioral pattern we talk about in the Enneagram called the colluding heart, where I sort of understand that when I do these things, I get the sort of rush in my body that says, yep, you did it right, it worked, right? And someone notices me, and I'm like, there it is. And then what we recognize is that it empties out really fast. It's not enough, right? Because it's coming outside in. And so that's a really tricky place for a 3, because you're like, but it works, right? When I sort of hustle this hard, it does work. And what I'm struggling with is it doesn't stay, you know? And so it helps it, like, I think this sort of behavioral pattern, and we know this in organizational development, thinking about engagement, how we keep, you know, employees engaged, and it's sort of the spontaneity of behavior and action. And so when we do things behaviorally, and if we sort of center this around the 3, if we do things behaviorally that are spontaneous, that are out of the norm, that are just because, we get sort of a positive reaction, right? Whether that's hormones or all of the feel-good things or in connection, it creates this sort of positive experience. When I do things over and over and over again that are expected, it creates a neutral experience for my connections, right? So I start getting up every day and getting breakfast ready for the whole family. When I did it the first time or the second time or the third time, I felt really good because everyone was sort of surprised and excited and appreciated. But 3 months in, and now it's like, where's breakfast kind of a thing, you know? It's like this expected. It doesn't create that sort of colluding heart. Now I have to do breakfast, and I have to be thinking about lunch, and I have to be, you know, we add to it. And then what happens when I don't do it? What happens when I miss it? Then somebody is like, where's breakfast? And it has a negative reaction. So what it teaches the 3 over and over and over again is that I have to keep changing what I do. The benchmark has to keep going further and further away, because in order for me to get this colluding experience and connection, I have to keep changing what I do in order for it not to become expected or have a negative effect. And that's the crap of it, right? And I was working in one of my groups, and there was a woman that was a 3. She's like, what do I do when I work in an environment that celebrates and rewards me for these behaviors, right? Like corporate culture is sort of, in its capitalistic nature, very much values people who are high achieving. So whether you are a 3 or you learn to act like a 3 in these environments, we get rewarded when we overdo. And so I think for me, that was a really powerful reminder that that's a hard cycle to break for a 3, when you feel like that's sort of counterintuitive to stop something that you're like, but I know it works.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your perspective of that, how you would sort of pull that apart or add some depth to it, and sort of your shared experience around the 3 and those patterns, like what feels true, what doesn't.
I would love to start. As you're talking, I see myself so much. And I think that it was part of the reason I was drawn to behavioral psychology, like in the psych degree, you know, there's all these different aspects. And I went into behavioral psychology because it made sense to me, right? Reinforcement, different kinds of reinforcement and punishment, and how it all works. I was like, oh, a box I can put things in and understand them, and then do the things to, like, right. And then, so as I continued to grow and expand my understanding, things started to feel off kilter. What I think has been really helpful for me in my need to do is to learn how to do things that balance that kind of cultural typical patterning out.
Sure.
So learning how to do, and I'm going to go to the body because that's what I do. Learning how to do things that help regulate my body when everything else is like, I'm looking for that reinforcement, right? And so like the addiction of the like positive reinforcement. So I learned how to do things with my body that supported the downside. And so breath work was really big. And these things that support the things that I can do with my body, whether it's breath work or different somatic practices, they support me in coming down so then I can sit with the not doing. But to just go from doing and achieving and reinforcement into doing nothing feels like punishment. And so it was this like titration of, okay, I can do this and I can do this. It's a little smaller doing and a little smaller doing and a little smaller doing until then I'm sitting with the being.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah.
So that's been really helpful for me. And that's what came up for me as you were talking.
It was beautiful.
I also recognized myself as you're sharing about that, specifically was struck by that pattern of being reinforced for achieving and doing. And I thought I would maybe share a personal example that came to mind of how this has played out for me. Before I had kids, I was really involved in a professional endeavor. I was on a board. I was very busy. My calendar was full. And I was very much daily being reinforced, probably like chemically with dopamine, who knows what, but also, you know, praise or whatever. It reinforced my way of being in the world that I'm good. I'm being reminded out here, I am good and I'm appreciated, and all the things that continue. When I decided to stay home after having my first child, and in relatively short order had 2 additional children. And so there was this period recently where I mentioned before, I had 4 or 5 years at home with, and in that my life got smaller. So I stepped off that board. I wasn't working. I was doing the making breakfast. But here's the thing, I underestimated the impact that would have on me emotionally, spiritually, to step away from this way of being in the world that I didn't know was feeding me until I did it. And then I sunk really low because what happened was there wasn't, I mean, with young kids, it's like you clean the stupid high chair tray every single day. Kids aren't great at saying thank you or you're so wonderful. Interestingly, I noticed also like tension with my husband because I'm trying to find that my sense of self out here, like who am I? And it's that negative on your little chart, like it's the negative. I'm doing the same things every day. And anyway, long story short, I think what I recognized as you were sharing is how frankly, like how much of myself, my sense of esteem is built through those and reinforced through those up arrow experiences, and how little of that I was able to achieve in my role as a mom of young children. And I didn't even know it until I was depressed, frankly. So anyway, I really resonate with what you share, and I have to be aware of, I'm trying to learn to be aware of how much I do look outside of myself to feed my sense of being both good enough and also alive, like it. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's such a beautiful example, Jen, of whether you orient in 3 or you live in 3 culture, right? And so we understand the identities of Enneagram is individual and it's also collective, right? Like we can sort of look at corporate culture or American culture, and we really value performance. We have entire reward mechanisms around what our output in the world. And so to shift that structure it can be really harmful for folks. And that sort of reclaiming work of, you know, the shift from the human doing to the human being and how I sort of honor all of that is not a light switch. It is really hard, and it requires like a clawing, you know, of work. And so I think just the fact that of your sharing where it took you and sort of the work that you're doing to find your way out of that made me feel really seen and safe, that I've had those experiences, even though I don't identify as 3. And I can't imagine if my motivational patterns reinforce that, how hard it would be to break those cycles. So I just really appreciate you sharing.
What it made me think about was when I was doing corporate stuff in big companies, and I was always the fixer. there would be a program or department that wasn't doing well, and or like a crisis would come up, and it was like, oh, Katie can manage that, or hey, there's this new thing we need to develop, hey, we'll give that to Katie. And just that, like, my plate wasn't getting any bigger, but more things were getting on it. And what I started to notice was patterns. I started to notice patterns that, like, you know, because I'd been there for a while. And so, like, oh, we tried this and it didn't work, so we tried this, and we kept trying things. And then all of a sudden we were back to this, and we weren't stepping out of that. And then I noticed how I was playing into that. And so there was a dynamic of like mentor leaders, a male and a female, where it was similar patterns of, like, he'd be in charge of stuff and things would kind of fall apart, and she would come in and clean it up. And then there was kind of the same dynamic that was happening with me and a counterpart. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm tired of being the cleaner upper. I'm tired of covering for other people. I'm tired of being at the office at 10 o'clock at night, you know, still answering emails. And so, like, coming back to me. And as I've continued to do this work, some of the language that has come up is the coming back to the self-worth inside rather than the self-esteem on the outside. And instead of that self-esteem having that ripple effect in to shift my self-worth, starting from the inside out and coming back to my self-worth and my preciousness and the things we know about attachment, the being seen, heard, valued, and delighted in, and coming back to that within me. And then that self-worth coming out rather than those behavior things coming in.
Yeah. And I think that's where like, Aurora, I know you identified with some of the one qualities, and right, that we sort of look at it, the one being the perfectionist, when really they're just always improving, right? And I think the three can get lost behaviorally in the tip of that iceberg, to use your language, Katie, because they're so hardworking and have this really incredible capacity. And so I think the part that is really powerful to hold for folks who are trying this on is the thinking around, just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Yes. Because if we were to lay body work over top of this, right, like, you work a muscle over and over and over again, you get stronger. So the fact that as threes you can do a lot because you're strong, you've had to and conditioned to do a lot. Those muscles are really bulky and they're badass. And so then to kind of go back to what Aurora was saying, to go from using all of that capacity to then saying, oh, I'm not going to use that capacity anymore, that can feel harmful in its own way. And so
also really scary.
Mm-hmm. And like grounding.
Yeah. And that's where I think Aurora and why we sort of pushed into all of that embodiment work together through the lens of the Enneagram is to help folks, forward moving types like threes, also sevens and eights, or people who sort of go at the world, to down regulate versus thinking about it in these two binary experiences. I'm either on or off, right? Like, so what does that look like for you to sort of push into resources for yourself? What does it look like for you to down regulate, or to do less, or to slow down, right? Do you have things that are go-tos that usually always work, or a couple of things that you try? Or take any.
I think for me, the thing that is almost a necessity is solitude. And the reason is because of how I either intentionally or unintentionally turn it up to a different gear when I'm with other people, often unknowingly. And I'm engaged and I'm bringing a lot of social energy, for better or worse. I'm activated, and solitude, it allows me, it's like I downshift, because I don't have to worry about anyone else, what anyone is thinking about me, how I'm doing. It's like my energy literally can downshift, but it requires being alone because of how social how I'm oriented socially, but also my, I don't know, threeness or something. So when I'm alone, I can breathe a little deeper.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
It's so good. I guess I'd never connected that to my threeness. But in college, I figured out like Friday nights I would work for a little bit. I went to school in a smaller town, and so everybody would like leave and go to the big city, and I would work for a little bit and then come home and like I'd have the house to myself. And so Friday nights became like this time that I craved and that quietness. And that was over 20 years ago. And even still, Friday nights, we won't hang out with anybody who's like a time crunch. Like if we have to stress about what time to be there, or can't just like grab food on the way, or have to make something, or have to be like, those are not our Friday night people. Those are not our Friday night plans. And so I just I'd never connected that. So thanks, Bryn.
Yeah, I'm going to agree that solitude is a big piece for me too. And I think that part of that is just the season of life I'm in. I'm never alone. Like I'm alone right now, and like in my house, and it's so interesting and odd. So part of it, I think, is just season of life. The body has been huge, which is why I do what I do with other people, is because it's been so healing for me to go into the body, and it helps bring my awareness inward. Like Katie, you were saying, it's like finding that piece inside of me to let out. So the pulling the awareness from outside to inside has been big. And so the body is very clear for me. It's a clear place to go, which is important for me. And then also recognizing it's always shifting and always changing for me, because even though the body is somewhere I go, it's not like the yoga practice is the only thing I do, because sometimes it doesn't do it. Like sometimes I'll try it on and it's like, this isn't working today, or like a breath practice, or these different tools that I've built in my tool belt. One of the most beautiful ones right now is nature, to go be in nature. I feel like it literally fills me up. Like I can feel the energy of the sun and the trees and the plants and all these beautiful things in nature. I actually feel like it's like energizing me, like it's plugging me in. So that's the thing that's serving me the most right now, and recognizing that it's always changing, and not to give up on finding it, because it might look different. I just might need to uncover another rock and be like, oh, this is worthy of my moment to fill up and recharge.
So what could people do, the people in your life who love you, or as people sort of experience this, things that they can ask of those that they love, what could people do that allows you to do less, that allows you to sort of ignore the need for action, or to slow down, maybe even find stillness, right? What could people do to help you?
The dishes and the laundry. But if you think I'm kidding, and that is literally what people could do for me. Because it robs my joy, and I spend so much time doing those two things, and I could do so many other things that would make me feel full and alive. So that's the truth.
I want someone to play with, because play has a way of bringing me into the present. I'm very future oriented, and so if I can be in the moment playing, it's great. It's often short-lived, but please bring me to that place of being in the present through play.
I was going to say the same thing. Like I've had to like set down my to-do list and go play with kid, like plan to go to the zoo. So we go to the zoo at least weekly, and, play and run and, make funny animal sounds. Like, but I have to, and that's probably a layer of it too, is getting out of my house, especially working from home. I, over the last 3 months, so this whole time working from, I haven't had a designated office area. And so I've really, really pushed to have a designated office area to kind of keep that stuff in a container for me. And so I think probably part of that just is, you know, to get away from the laundry, to get away from the dishes and all the repair things and all the things that need to be done. Stepping out, or even sometimes saying to me directly, like, Katie, we can do that later. Like, we can hit pause on that. And I think the other layer about it would be like the pendulum swinging. Realizing that it doesn't have to be forever, right? Like, let's go play for 30 minutes and then we can come back to tasks. So
that was a really good point, Katie, in that.
I was going to say, I really liked what you shared too about people holding responsibility with me, for me, and feeling like I can trust people to do the dishes and to see that the laundry is not done.
Yep.
That helps.
Absolutely. I was just going to note, Katie, when you said to have somebody remind me that it's not forever, that was really helpful. My husband will say to me, let's set that down right now. We'll do it tomorrow. Like, I have this need to like have the dishes done at the end of the night so I can relax. And once in a while, he'll be like, honey, let's just do it in the morning. Like, I'll do it. How about I'll do it in the morning and let's just leave it for tonight. And then I'm like, okay, I can get behind that. And so, yes, absolutely.
Being raised by a 3, I have a lot of some of the doing tendencies, and that could be my 7 active energy too. But being in partnership with the 6, there's some pulling back that happens somewhat naturally. And so there's a few things that my husband has done that has really centered me in the, I really value a picked up house, right? The environment really manages my nervous system, which is totally irresponsible to give that much power to my environment. But he'll be like, all right, let's do 10 minutes, give it our best effort, whatever gets done in these 10 minutes, and then we're going to leave it. And that has started like anchoring both of our needs, right? Where he's like, I don't really want to do this right now, that I don't care that there are socks on the dining room table. Like, that does not bother me. That bothers you. So I think that shared effort, what you say in jest, Aurora, is a real thing when we're sort of in partnership with other people. And then also, as somebody who does have high capacity, knowing that we would want shared responsibility, how do we ask for it, right? Because again, you go back to the muscle, it's strong. And so I can just do it because it's easier, I'm faster, or I'm right here, I want it done a certain way. Or, you know, other people will let me do it because we're so good at it, right? So how do we ask? And is that hard for you?
Yeah.
You're laughing at me, Katie.
I'm not laughing at you. Again, let's come back to how somebody can like come in and like, whammo, like, you're asking that question. I'm like, really? Are you really asking that question?
It's out of love.
Yeah. Yes. It is extremely hard to ask for help.
Because they can't do it as good as I do it. And that's the truth of how I feel sometimes. Like, I don't want you to do that because I'll do it better. And I don't say that out loud. Like, I'm not a mean person. But I'll just be like, it's okay, I got it. You know, and the truth of it for me is, I don't want you to do that. You're going to mess it up. Let me just do it.
We joke about the dishwasher because Jeff will say, my husband will say, like, Katie, there's not one right way to do it. And I will say, but there is, if you're trying to maximize the amount of dishes in there and maximize the cleanliness so they're not like stacked up on top of each other, then yes, there is a right way to do it.
So I have a different problem going on, which is like, I want points. That's my messed up thing. Like, I don't necessarily think I can do it better, but I want some like praise, appreciation. I want someone to notice. And when someone doesn't notice, it can get ugly. So bad. Oh,
it's neither bad nor good. It's how we've learned to be in the world, and it's gotten reinforced over and over and over again. And sort of breaking up with those patterns is really, really hard. I think some of this had to happen in my life out of necessity. But one of the things that my husband and I did several years ago, and this was out of a recommendation from a friend, where we sat down and we sort of tasked out our life and shared responsibility, and we negotiated who was responsible for what. My husband is like you, Katie, there's a way to load the dishwasher. So the dishes became his because he cared about it more. But then we had to sort of negotiate expectations around the dishes. This is the service level agreement that we have around when the dishes get done. And so I couldn't then nag and control, and they needed to be done right now. It's they may stay in the sink for 2 or 3 days if they're going to be his. And if I care that much, I'll get in and intervene, right? And so I'm struggling to reduce my capacity, which means I don't do as much. Sometimes I have to leave the dishes or the laundry. There's literally a basket of laundry poured out on my couch, and I'm letting it stay there because that's part of what he's agreed to help with, and I have to let him help, which is painful. So I think this is a good conversation for folks in the world who orient their goodness out of doing. That sometimes we have to break up with those patterns, and it's really, really hard to do. So while I know, Aurora, you started that conversation, it's true. And also it is a lot harder to do than it is to just say.
What would it be like? I'm just like sitting with this question of like, what would it be like to wake up in the morning and just wholeheartedly know to your core, like, I am so good. I am enough no matter what I do. Even if I show up imperfectly in the world, that to me is a question because I've spent so much of my life orienting out and having this performance oriented view towards my goodness and my enoughness. Sometimes I do wonder if I could just access that, it might be so wonderful for me. Like I truly am enough before I do a thing. Like I'm really enough.
And isn't that radical healing?
Yeah. What would it be like to not try so hard? That'd be something.
Aurora, you were going to say something, I think.
Oh, it was about the dishes. But to Jen's point, I am in this really interesting season, and I think it was really pandemic related, to where I have found moments of that where like I really do feel into my enoughness and the stillness, and that's why I like hold the body practices so closely, is because that's where I was able to access it for me. And my struggle right now is going back into like now like more doing again and more scheduling. So like we had this really like crazy shift of like normal life and then pandemic. And then as we're kind of moving forward into this next year of like what's life looking like, I'm seeing the speed kind of ramp up again. And I'm feeling super resistant because I found this sweetness or this touch of sweetness that has helped me feel balanced in my life more. And like, I don't know how to jump back in without the doing taking over. And so I'm in this really interesting place right now, which I think is directly related to what's happening in our world, right? So also like, can we look at the Enneagram and our typing in relationship to what's happening in the world right now, which is different than it's ever been.
Sure. And all the mechanisms that we know to be seen are shifting. Totally.
I was thinking, Jen, as you were talking, that I agree. Like I like Aurora, like I don't feel like that all the time. But there are moments, and the language that I use about it is when those other thoughts come in, those are the lies. And so coming back with truth for those lies. And so having that language and that filter of, anytime anything comes in that questions my worthiness, whether that's a conversation with somebody, something that somebody says, something that I, quote unquote, inflict on myself, just coming back to, oh, there's that lie again. And I can see that lie. And so it starts to help like reduce the intensity of it for me. Yeah. And to kind of see it like, and maybe like container it, right? Like compartmentalize it and go, oh yeah, that is separate. And I can see my worthiness separate and apart from those lies.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a reminder, Katie, that sort of the radical healing of a 3 is truth, right? The accessibility, Jen, of waking up every morning knowing that you are already perfect and whole and worthy, right? Like that's the sort of radical truth of it all. And so this is a nice segue into my question of, if you could share one or multiple of your gifts. Like obviously we have a lot to learn in behavioral patterns, but we do a lot well too, right? We're very gifted. So what would you say is one of, or your greatest gift?
I tend to have tremendous belief in the human potential, both as an individual or as a group. I can see where someone can go. I can hold a goal or an objective or a trajectory and provide both strategic ideas about how to get there, but also a sense of motivation and inspiration and like a wholehearted sense, like we are going there, we can do that. And it's especially prominent for me in groups. I'm wondering if it's that social instinct. I love working on a group towards an objective, a goal that feels meaningful to me. It feeds my soul like nothing else. And I thrive in helping people, like, we're going to do that thing. We're going to do it and we can do it. And just listen to me. Let's go. I'm going to lead the way. Let's do this. That's what I can give.
That's amazing.
I would say for me, it's this like great desire for learning and growth, right? I'm in this season right now. I have so many books that I'm in the middle of, and it just excites me. Like it used to overwhelm me, and now I'm just excited. And I have so many books on the list to come, and I can't wait. Like there is not enough knowledge and understanding and knowing and learning and growing for this one life.
It's amazing.
I think when I think about what I do well, I come back to being able to do the hard things, to like be in the trenches with people and hold and be sturdy, be grounded. And Jen, kind of like you were saying, like make that plan, like see the hope on the other side and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I see that in you, Katie.
Thanks, friend.
So my last question is, because we sort of end where we start, right? The work is to help people go deeper than the iceberg, the tip. So what would you want people to know about when your behaviors are showing up? When you sort of are, I say this is like when my 7's showing, right? Like you're all in your threeness. Like, what do you want people to know?
I like, Erin, what you shared earlier about the misconception about 3. Sometimes people think 3s are the ones with all the blue gold first place medals and the promotions at work and all of that. My personality shows up so much in the domain of relationships, almost like I want to get the gold medal in the friendship. I want to get the gold medal, the win, the achievement, but so much in the domain of relationships, which I think is why I thought I was a 2 there for a second. So I think what I would say to that is, I so want to be a good friend. I so want to show up perfectly in this domain of relationships with people. But like, it would mean so much to me if somehow my imperfections, like I could show up less than perfect and be these things that I deem so threatening to my love and belonging and enoughness, like not always nice or not always encouraging, and so I would say to people, I would want you to know that it's hard for me to not work at relationships, but it would mean a lot to me to feel loved despite my work. But I'm going to make that really hard. Like I'm going to keep, it is almost impossible for me to turn that off. And that's my journey. That's my work for myself, is showing up imperfectly. So I want that though. And I want to experience love in that.
Yeah. That is so helpful for somebody who sits on the outside of 3 to hold that seed while I sort of can witness and make room for that perspective as I tell my own stories, right? So Jen, thank you for putting language and adding more depth to my knowing so that I can love more inclusively for a 3.
So 2 things. Number 1, my shirt says, be you, they'll adjust. And so as you were talking, I was like, oh, but also I think, Erin, when you asked that question, I started getting really tearful. Because that's what I think I want people to know that sit in this, that feel like that busyness and that striving and that that constant go of like burnout and tiredness and cycle, that you can be you, that you can come back and you can sit, and that you have everything inside of you that is good and precious and worthy. Just you. That's it. That's all you need.
It's beautiful. Thanks for making us cry, Katie.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think what I would want people to know when I'm in my behaviors and I'm in my stuff is that I just want you to like me.
Yeah.
Just want you to like me. And what I've learned in my life thus far is that what matters most is that I like myself. And that's the healing balm, right? And so when I see myself, when I can see myself in my 3 behaviors that are not working and not healthy, if I can return to what is it in me that is not allowing me to like and or love myself, and how can I rub that soothing balm all over me so that I'm not looking for it outside of myself. And that's a journey that we all have to take, because we're all going to be different, even in our 3-ness, right? But that's the underlying thing that I'm trying to express in my behavior, is I just want you to like me.
Aurora, that's so beautiful.
Great. That was the first thing that came as soon as Erin asked that question. I was like, well, I just want you to like me, you know? And then just to kind of sit here and kind of consider that, and like, what is that really? So, yeah, thanks.
Beautiful. I am beyond grateful for the 3 of you walking us through your perspectives and your knowing and your heart, because they're all big and beautiful and amazing. And I'm excited for what it sort of kicks open for other people as they consider what it means to celebrate all that makes us great, while also making room that I can and do deserve, more parts of me to come into the mix. So thank you. Big thank you. I love you all.
Thanks, Erin.